Lauren, just so you know, I am trying to promote you in as a panelist, so it's not working.
Can you hear that?
Yeah, there's not a study session tonight.
Hello, test.
I hear you.
Okay, great. How are you doing, Joseph?
Good, how are you?
Good. Let's see what I'm looking at here. That's better.
I don't see the room yet.
Neither do I. Joseph, did you say something? He can't hear.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Yes, we're ready.
Hi.
It's more fun live, you know that.
Oh, yeah. I am live.
In person, I'm sorry.
All right, everybody ready? Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukie Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the website at www.milwaukeeoregon.gov. You may locate them by navigating to the community calendar where tonight's meeting page is posted. If you have not reviewed the agenda, please do so. It contains important information about the process. The City of Milwaukie respectfully acknowledges that our community is located on the ancestral homeland of the Clackamas people. In 1855, the surviving members of the Clackamas signed the Willamette Valley Treaty, also known as the Calliope, etc. Treaty, with the federal government in good faith. We offer our respect and gratitude to the indigenous people of this land. Now for our minutes. Moving on to approval of the minutes from August 23rd, 2022. Does anyone have any corrections to make or request? Seeing none, I will entertain then a motion to approve the notes as presented.
Chair, I would like to make a motion to approve the minutes of August 23rd, 2022 as presented.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All those in favor, aye.
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 Any opposed? Nay? All right. Unanimous. Approval of the minutes for August 23rd, 2022. Now on to informational items. Staff, are there any items to share?
Not at this moment, thank you.
All right. And for audience participation, it looks like we do have a couple folks in the audience. Maybe
Chair Lisfeld, I don't
they're
believe
panelists. Right. I'm sorry, were you agreeing with me? They are.
Yes, they are panelists. There are no audience members.
Okay, I'm gonna skip number 4 on the agenda and go straight to 5. Community Involvement Advisory Committee, the CIAC. At this point on the agenda, the Planning Commission will act as the CIAC. I now ask staff to provide any updates.
I just wanted to say that, so we had our meeting last Thursday, the joint NDA meeting and the CIAC meeting with John Hennington. And there are some follow-ups from the joint NDA meeting. And I would like to talk about those at our next meeting because we've kind of got a little bit of a full agenda tonight, if that's all right with folks.
That's fine with me. Do any members of the CIAC have items to report back on? Okay, and because we,
Chair, I don't have an item to report back on, but I would like to make a comment if I may.
Sure.
People in the world don't really need to know what my background is, but I am strongly community driven. And I was very disappointed at the amount of attention that the NDAs paid to our meeting the night before or last meeting, just by attendance. And so it bothers me. And I had actually conducted a survey with about 60 residents, and a lot of it was combined around community involvement. So I'm not gonna, I hate complaining without a solution. So to cut the time short, one of the complaints, especially from the longtime residents, when I say longtime residents, I'm talking about 7 years or more, because they remember back in the day when we used to all sit in a room of 100 people and we'd have basically kind of an open forum with a bunch of maps lying around where we could draw, we could express our ideas freely and openly. What I'm afraid is that the TSP process already has been, we've eliminated even asking an at-large NDA. We've limited it down to 6. And I know what the excuse is, and it's the same darn excuse everybody uses in this city time, money, and then my new favorite word is bandwidth. I am hoping, because I probably won't be sitting on this commission, but when you commissioners are sitting here and we start talking about the public process with the TSP, that we demand that it be brought out into the public. And I would love to see another larger forum like that where we can get a lot of people together to express their ideas. And that is my hope, and that is my solution, so that when people come to testify in here, we don't use our excuses like it's too complicated, you don't understand, there's already been a process. So why don't we have the community come in together and let them be able to share their ideas and then begin the process? Because without knowing what the community wants, how do we even know to where to begin the process? Thank you.
Commissioner Heemener, thanks for the comments there. I too was disappointed with the turnout for our conversation last time around with the NDA. I was curious to know, Laura, if you were surprised at all, the numbers there, although I do really appreciate the two that were in attendance and hung on through the night to keep the conversation going. And I thought we got some good information and feedback from them. But Laura, were you at all surprised by the turnout that evening?
I mean, yes, I was surprised. I guess this is the second joint NDA meeting I've had since we've been here, but I've only been here since COVID. So I don't know. I've heard that lots more people showed up before COVID. Last time we got together, I think there were 8 or 9 NDA members. And so there were only 2. And we did really, Jason did a big push with the NDAs to try to get folks to come out. So I don't think it was a lack of communication. So it was disappointing. I think that maybe COVID is having an impact on the folks that want to actually show up in spaces. But to Greg's, Commissioner Heemer's point, we will be trying to have some more gathering during the TSP process and trying to bring folks together when we feel it's safe throughout the process, definitely. And we'll continue to try to bring as many people together as we can. I guess we're just in a little bit of a changing times, and I don't think that it's completely transitioned back to a normal time for what public engagement might look like. I think we're seeing a lot of pretty good response. Like right now, we've got the housing needs analysis and the housing capacity analysis survey up, and we've gotten, I think, over 150 responses at this point, which is even better than what we got for the comprehensive plan implementation outreach. So people do seem to be engaging on the Engage Milwaukie platform, but we will do our best to continue to try to reach out to as many people as we can.
Thank you, Laura. And Greg, I also want to speak to the effort that the city has gone through to reach out and to have greater communication and cast a wider net, and the efforts that have been made to make sure that a larger swath of the community is involved in these conversations. And I want to share a kudos to the city on those efforts and recognize that there are always areas where we could improve and do better, Greg. So I do appreciate that although you're sharing your passion and your concern behind the issue, proposing solutions or continuing to push all of us to advocate for greater opportunity for community involvement is important. And I think we are making strides in the positive direction, but there's always more that we could do. So thank you for those comments. Does anyone else on the commission want to speak before I move on in our agenda?
Maybe just briefly, I think I too was disappointed in turnout. I also believe I heard the NDA leadership meeting also might have had really low turnout. And so it just, makes me wonder why folks aren't feeling like it's worth their time to engage. So I hope we can think about that some more, especially as, we're carving time out of our time and our agendas to host a meeting at as council wants us to be the CIAC, but then it's not having a lot of impact. So I'd like to find a way to improve that.
Chair, if I may.
Yeah, of course.
So let me just offer one data point. I zoomed in on the leadership meeting, the NDA leadership meeting, and all of the NDAs were represented then, but there was only one chair there. So, I was there to try to tee up and narrow down the agenda for the joint meeting and that kind of thing. And so maybe just the fact that there weren't leaders at the leadership meeting, maybe it didn't get the kind of promotion that we would have hoped for. But I guess my question is, I'm still surprised that there weren't more leaders at the leadership meeting, although there was representation from the neighbors. And I would also like to just ask Greg. I mean, Greg, I hear you. Is your concern that the the effort that's gone through to develop the Citizens Advisory Group for the TSP is too small, too thin a sliver of the community? Is that the point that you're making?
So what happens is that because this is not a data point, but this is about feelings, and this is how people feel. So I think that the feeling is out there in the community is that because the field has been so narrowed down, that the decisions have probably already been made, and that public input is probably not even really valuable. And so you don't, I know we heard the concerns about the barriers to engage Milwaukie, which I know that Mr. Watts wasn't able to defend or deny or because he wasn't prepared, but we hear those barriers. I know that Engage Milwaukie has great amount of input, but very little output back. So you don't really know what the survey results are. And maybe that's for a good reason, because maybe the decisions have already been made. That is the feeling that is out there with the people that were with this administration when it began, when this open concept of meeting and talking and not feeling that things were decided beforehand. And I think what happened is that COVID, even though government has to go on, there were 3 major decisions that were done with, minimal amount of outreach. So, and then when they get up here to speak, at council and even at this planning commission, I've heard it 1,000 times. It's complicated, or there's already been a process, and so it just makes people feel like that, their voice doesn't even matter. And my feeling is that that's a shame. That's why we don't have people up here. We can use the excuse of COVID. We can use all sorts of excuses, but it really boils down to we missed the open concept at the beginning. And then at the end of it, because a few select people that were picked probably with the exact same mindset so that they would push forward the same ideas that they had, there was no public process. And that's what makes people feel bad. And that's why people have kind of given up.
Well, I will say for all of the land use work that I've done since I've been here with the city, we've done extensive public outreach all through COVID. Even though we couldn't meet in person, we have done extensive public outreach, and we've also reported back on all of the results that we've gotten from Engage Milwaukie. So there may be other things on Engage Milwaukie that I can't speak to, but I know that for all of our land use processes, that's been a major.
Well, I hope when the housing needs analysis thing closes and this planning commission starts to talk about it, that we actually get a printout with all the comments and everything that was on there. Because if that's the only thing that we're gauging our public comment on, and I know that we'll get a graph or results to the survey,
Sure.
But we actually don't ask for public comments. And if we're doing the TSP, there's lots of things that could be added in the TSP, but if we've already made our decisions on what we want to put in the TSP, then why even come and bother?
I don't think any decisions have been made about what's supposed to come.
Like I said, This is about feelings. This is about the residents' feelings. And so I can't say if that is true or not, but that is the feeling that goes around, especially when you know, where the longtime residents are used to having, well, one NDA rep sit on a TSP, bunch of people at large, and now we shrunk it down to 6. And
Well, just so you know, we are going to be making a recommendation to the city council regarding adding a 7th person so that there is someone from each neighborhood in the city on the committee. There's also recommending that there are 2 PSAC members, which are made up of representatives from the neighborhood associations. So we have heard that folks had some questions about that, so we have adjusted accordingly. So we are making that recommendation to city council.
And this is not a pick on or for defense, because that's why it doesn't do me any good to bring this up, because there will be always plenty of people in this room that will defend. So I just thought that I would get it out there. I'm actually going to put together more of a thorough report from the findings that I found, because I think that it's important as a community member. And you know what? I sit up here on this high-powered commission, and sometimes I even feel the same way. So I know that I'm not alone. I know there's a lot of residents that are not alone. And I think that's a quarter of the issue of why we're getting so low turnout for these kind of meetings.
I want to add something just real quick. I don't know if that would actually happen, but if the comments to any surveys were to be published, I think that that's something that needs to be disclosed before. So I don't think that retroactively comments should be posted or public. I mean, I don't know if it says on the surveys, you know, these comments, anything that you comment could be in public record, but that should be really large, because a lot of times, especially with the housing thing, when people are answering surveys, they might reveal a lot of details about their own life or their own struggles. And it's different than like an online public forum where people know that they're commenting and everybody can read. Sometimes when you fill out a survey, members of the community might be telling personal stories. So I don't know. I don't remember if there's a big disclosure that says your comments might be made public.
I would have to ask Jason about that, because he manages the site.
Especially with the housing, a lot of people really get vulnerable with telling their stories if there is a comment section, you know. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is I do have a lot of conversations with people online. And so I'm kind of with you in some regards as far as engagement in these kind of more structured forums. And I don't know how exactly to bridge that gap, but I see the conversations happening in the community. We have a very active, very engaged community. And of course, people are going to disagree about parking and trees and certain things, but they are really engaged and they are really talking. And a lot of times they'll express things a lot, and then they will feel heard because somebody that maybe does have the time to come in or advocate for those things is there pushing it, and then they kind of just go back to their lives. So, but I see it, and we have it a lot online.
Maybe just a few reactions. I think Amy's point about surveys, which probably are a public record. I mean, if I wanted to send in my records request tomorrow for all the survey results, I'm sure the city would probably have to turn them over. So making it clear to members of the public what they're writing in those, if they are writing anything personal, that they might just want to be thoughtful on that. But I think kind of what Commissioner Hemer is talking about, it brings me back to, and I know that I've mentioned it before, but don't know if other commissioners have had a chance to look at it, the International Association of Public Participation Professionals, IAP2. is an association essentially kind of planners and government officials that do public involvement work. And one of the things they've kind of laid out is what they call a spectrum of public participation, going from inform to consult to involve to collaborate to empower. And I pulled it up on my screen, and as I'm sitting here, I think one of the things where maybe there's a mismatch is that, I think many members of the community will want to be involved in the process. And sometimes where we might land is maybe you're not as much involved and it's more of a consulted role. And I think that leaves people feeling like their expectations and the process aren't aligned. And that leaves people then feeling like those expectations aren't met and why should I engage in the first place? And I don't want to say that's what always happens, but I think that just from some of the testimony we've heard from community members, whether on tree code or comprehensive plan or things like that, I think it's aired that mismatch in expectations versus how the process unfolds. And so to your point, I hope we can kind of really try and make sure we stay aligned on whatever the expectation is as we go into TSP.
All right. Thank you, everybody. I want to ask this commission that as we are members of this community, that we go into the community in these conversations that we have with folks that we know, whether online or in person, and we are sharing back any of the any of the conversations that we may have with them, that we are sharing what we know to be true. If you're to come across anything, Greg, that I'm sensing you're having these conversations frequently, that we are to hopefully represent what we know and understand as commission, but do so with truth, and then bring back any feedback, especially during this CIAC space, so that we can use that as kind of continuing conversation amongst ourselves and how to improve and to do better, so that that energy is focused on positive output. That's all I'll say. I'm going to move us on in the conversation here with the agenda, and we go directly into parks discussion with our work session item. The work session item is a discussion about the city's potential withdrawal from North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District, NCPRD. City council members will be present to provide this information. I believe we have two, Councilor Beatty and Councilor Hayes. Is that correct?
Yes, it is correct. Would you like to come up?
I will invite them to the table there.
Thank you, Chair. I was just saying to Commissioner Heemer the other day that I never get to sit on this side, and then look what happened.
3 minutes. Now you know how the timer works.
That. I just have to say that it was excruciating to sit through that conversation. I have to keep my mouth shut, but thank you all for being so thoughtful about that. My name is Kathy Heisey. I am the current council president for City Council, and I am here to give you all a presentation about a conversation, and I do mean that as a conversation, that we are starting and have been having for the past few weeks with community about the possibility of leaving the North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District. Some of you may have already heard this presentation. Some of you may have already given it. So hopefully I can make it exciting and engaging, and if not, just, take a little nap. I believe that Laura has Brett has the presentation. Thank you, Brett. And he's going to drive while I talk. And Councilor Beatty is going to come up and join me so that we can both be available to give you answers. But for this, I'm just going to do the talking. All right, slide. So we're here to talk about the future of Milwaukee City Parks. Next slide. As you all know, we tend to operate by having council goals, and that's a way for us to put resources and staff focus toward kind of big ideas and big projects. Our council goals that we've been working on for a while now, in particular, climate change and resilience has been on the list for over 5 years. And then after George Floyd's murder about 2 years ago, we added equity, justice, and inclusion as a council goal, replacing community engagement. And then this September, late August, we added a third goal, which was improving Milwaukee's park system and services. And we did add this as a goal in part to acknowledge that we've had a lot of conversation going on about this on council, and staff has been doing a lot of work on this for quite some time already. And also to elevate that conversation and make sure we're inviting the community into it in a way that we realized we just haven't been as much as we really need to and want to be. And we also have this opportunity to kind of think about climate change and resilience and equity, justice, and inclusion in a very concrete way in our parks. So that is part of our conversation. Next slide. So as we're thinking about this, we've been talking about how to explain the way we see those two goals being expressed through parks. And next slide. We know that parks can be a great place to think about, and actually probably our only tool for really addressing climate change in a way that absorbs carbon, in that we can have lots of trees in our parks. And as we're combating climate change, we also get to further our urban forestry initiatives. I know you all have talked about that extensively, by planting more trees and increasing our open space. And I think that there's also some real benefit in this around just having attractive town areas and having this, little bit of reducing our carbon dioxide production by 11,000 miles of car driving effectively by having more trees planted. We also know that parks have the ability to really increase our equitable access to outdoor areas. I don't know about you all, but I definitely needed to get out into our parks during the pandemic, and honestly, that hasn't changed. As we're looking at rapid development and the building of very sorely needed housing units, we have upwards of 1,500 we're expecting in the next 3 years. Council's been really concerned about our ability to keep up with our parks having as much availability and having enough green space simply available to these new residents who will be coming. Next slide. And we know that parks are healthy for us, not just mental health, but they also increase our basic physical activity. Kids need to go outside and run around and goof off. And if you're in an apartment, you don't get to do that unless you have access to outdoor spaces like parks. So we're looking at this as really an opportunity to think about how we can enhance our livability and the health of our residents in our parks. Right now, there's a figure that I'm not going to remember how you get this ratio, but it's commonly used, and it's a figure that has you should have a certain amount of acreage available for X number of residents. And Commissioner Sherman may actually remember this off the top of his head, but he does not. We are on the very low end of that spectrum in Milwaukie in terms of just what the state of Oregon and other communities in the state are looking to achieve. We're way down at the low end of having that ratio be correct. Next slide. We also know that parks are a place that strengthen our community ties. I know that I saw my neighbors, I saw my community members most often during the pandemic out in parks. We know that they're where some of our most important community events occur. That's where we have the solstice event. We see each other. I felt like the first time I really saw Milwaukie again after the pandemic was that Scott Park invitation to plan that we had in May next to the library. And it was like everybody came out. and families were there. We had people playing. It was sunny. It just felt like a breath of fresh air and like we were all really together in a really important, valuable way. So I think that as we're talking about community ties and figuring out how to come back from a really hard time on our ability to connect with one another, the opportunity to engage in thinking about our parks is a really powerful one. It's something that Milwaukie cares about. We have a long track record of strong community engagement in our parks. And I feel like it's an opportunity for us to exercise joy in some really concrete ways. So, next slide. So that's a breeze through of our goals and how these things all connect to one another. But when you get down to it, in Milwaukie, we don't control our own funding sources for the parks that we have. We were actually a founding member of the North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District in 1990. And that district is paid for by a tax that each property owner pays to the district. And that is specifically for parks construction and maintenance. And it should be helping to pay for increased green spaces in Milwaukie and in the other jurisdictions that are served by NCPRD. But we've been having a hard time really bringing that to fruition in Milwaukie in particular of late. We have a little challenge in that the funding is really controlled by the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners. We don't have a say in that. The Clackamas County Board of Commissioners they just put on different hats to be the board of NCPRD, and they are the ones who ultimately say yay or nay to any budget that comes out of NCPRD. And that has been a challenge. Even though we have no Parks and Recreation Department here in Milwaukie, and we have no ongoing parks budget and no maintenance budget, the reason we have continued to build parks and to expand the availability of parks in Milwaukie is because of the efforts of Milwaukie staff and Milwaukie city councils. Next slide. And this has happened because we've been directing funds, specifically city funds, to land acquisition and park design and park construction. And we've made sure that we continue to own the parklands that our parks reside on in Milwaukie. And this is different from other parts of NCPRD. If you go elsewhere in the district outside of Milwaukie, NCPRD is the owner of the property. You may recall that Happy Valley City was previously a member of NCPRD. They left in 2019. They did not own their parks land, which made their departure a bit more of a sticky wicket. And we've also gone outside of our funding sources, so beyond basic city resources, and we've won regional, state, and federal grants that are maximizing those little bit of dollars that are ours that we put into our parks. So that has been how we have, managed without any funding or support from the County Board of Commissioners to acquire and build a whole bunch of our local parks. I can read the whole list there, but I think you can see it pretty clearly. It runs all the way down. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 parks, plus the award-winning path that runs through Kronberg Park, which was a multi-million-dollar project that really did win awards. I'm not even just making that up. So we feel pretty good about the fact that we have been able to deliver on parks, despite the fact that we don't actually have any of the resources you should need to do that. And while we're doing that work, we're kind of going, is this relationship really working? Because this is a lot of effort. This is a lot of staff time. This is money that we have put in above and beyond what money our residents and property owners here in Milwaukie are paying to NCPRD. And that's kind of what's led us to start this conversation with the community, is to say, okay, we need to be a little more transparent about how this is really working, that all of this is happening because of us, not because of NCPRD, not because of the money that we all are paying into that district. And I say that with no disparaging remark to NCPRD staff, I know many of us have personal relationships with them. They're good people. They are working very hard. They do excellent work with the resources they have. Our conflict is not with NCPRD staff. They have been great to work with at every turn. But the reality is we've ended up in a place where politics are getting in the way of us being able to have our parks work the way we want them to. Next slide. So we're here because we want to tell you how council feels, and we're kind of thinking we could do it better. And we feel that because we know our community, we are directly elected by and responsible to the citizens of Milwaukie and the residents of Milwaukie and the property owners of Milwaukie. We are really good at being responsive and moving faster with better direction. And in particular, when I'm talking about that, I'm thinking about Milwaukie Bay Park, which is a 25-year dream of this community. It has been worked on parcel by parcel. Dozens of people have sunk time and effort. They've donated property to make that dream come alive. And in fact, the first two phases of Milwaukie Bay Park, the way it looks now, happened because of the work that the city has done to make it happen. And we had an opportunity to, with the Metro Parks Bond a couple of years ago, say, okay, we're going to bring it home. We are going to finish this park. And as we got into it, NCPRD said that they wanted to be involved and do the planning process, and they generated a new plan instead of using the one that we already had on the books. And that plan is about $9 million before the years of delays that we have experienced. So it's actually probably quite a bit more than that at this point. And we have proceeded to experience delay after delay after delay from NCPRD and the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners. The most recent one being a 90-day delay that was declared in September on beginning construction. We were anticipating that it would begin in February, and now that's another 90 days out. As you know, right now we are in a significant inflationary period, and every delay comes with catch. That means the park gets more and more expensive with every turn. And that is a great disappointment, particularly as we do have increased density coming to our urban core. And we are looking to make sure that we have a park available to serve those new residents and new families that will be coming in. So that's one example of delays, and probably the most painful one for us on council, but there are others as well. So as we're thinking about how we could move forward, I already gave you the example of building parks that are serving the whole region. I have heard in the community concerns about NCPRD being hurt by our potential departure. I would like to set those to rest. We are currently about 20% of the population in the Parks District. That leaves 80% still there to continue paying fees and to make it go. And we don't put up fences or walls around our parks. They will not become something that are only available exclusively to Milwaukie residents. They will continue to be amenities that everyone throughout the region can enjoy. And I want to highlight that we're also pretty good at holding events, not to toot our own horn, but Milwaukie throws a good party and we like it. So when we're thinking about community events and bringing opportunities that you might be seeing come through NCPRD, I just want to highlight that we do a good job of that right now, and we would be able to consult with our community more directly and kind of get those more directly aligned with the immediate needs and interests of our community members. Next slide. We also feel like with the story of Milwaukie Bay Park, you heard how it's kind of become a political football and there's a lot of red tape getting in the way of just completing projects. We do feel like we would cut out a whole level of bureaucracy if we no longer had NCPRD as a parks district engaged. And we can move faster save some money, get these projects really built. And it also means that instead of having all of the input and work around developing parks go to a third party, it is City Council and our Parks Department talking directly to community members, our community members talking directly to our Parks and Recreation Board, and our Parks and Recreation Board being empowered to actually do the work of figuring out what we need in our parks, which has been a very challenging role for them to fill right now because they don't have a direct line of influence with NCPRD's board, which is, again, the county commissioners. We also feel like with our community in charge, we can continue to maximize and really multiply our local funding and make sure that we're just really being effective with using our resources and engaging our local residents in the process. Next slide. So this is a conversation that we're just starting, and we've been to, I think, all except for 2 NDA meetings in October, and we will circle back to those other 2 when we get the opportunity. We had scheduling issues with both of them. There will be some public forums that are happening. We have a survey up, I believe, right now on Engagement Milwaukie. Do we have the survey up? We don't have the survey up. Blank looks from staff. Okay. We're working on doing our outreach work. And as we're thinking about this, City Council, of course, needs to figure out how to pay for it if we are going to do it. The way we would do that is to place a small levy on the ballot in 2023. And this would be the time at which residents would decide, are we going to actually leave the district or not? We're still determining what the legal pathway is out for leaving the district, so I can't answer that question with great detail or confidence. But what I can tell you is that our council would not, any iteration of council, since we do have an election coming up, would not choose to leave the district without having an assurance that we would be able to pay the bills. And that would effectively mean that this levy would have to pass in order for us to be comfortable leaving the district. The levy we would put on the ballot would not be a tax increase. We have had a presentation from staff. We know that we can do maintenance of our current parks at the same level or better than we already are getting from NCPRD at the same rate that taxpayers are currently paying, which is roughly 54 cents per $1,000 of assessed value on property. So effectively, the levy would be a decision point for community members to say, instead of giving that amount of money, which is roughly $100 a year for your average homeowner, to NCPRD, we are going to ask that that money go to the City of Milwaukie to fund the creation of their Parks Department and to do ongoing maintenance and operations and all of that jazz. As we move to a levy structure, that does mean it gets renewed every 5 years. Right now in NCPRD, we are in what's known as a special district. It's the same way we currently pay for our fire services in the city. It's a rate that is set. You pay it every year until somebody comes along and says, we want to increase it, and then voters have to, approve that increase. If we move to a levy, that means that every 5 years, voters will have the opportunity to approve or deny a levy to fund our parks. And that doesn't introduce risk, because if that levy is not approved, then we don't have a way to pay for the maintenance of our parks. It also introduces some accountability. And it means that what we're doing in our parks is very closely tied to what our community wants, or we're failing. As we're having these conversations, we're going to be incorporating public input and We'll be looking at potential funding sources, putting those into master documents. This is work that staff is already engaged in doing on a preliminary level. Again, it's not a commitment. It's just that as we are having this conversation, we want to be able to assure folks that we have the best available knowledge and figures for fueling the conversation. And no matter what we decide, and I do mean we'll keep providing the best parks and recreation services that we can to Milwaukie, because they are kind of the heart of our community in many ways. That's all I got. And Councilor Beatty wants to.
While you were talking, there's a new website that was created, www.ourmilwaukeeparks.com. And there will also be, if the information in this email is correct, a Parks Town Hall scheduled for November 10th from 6 to 7:30 at the Milwaukie Ledding Library.
Thank you.
There's your announcements. Always wanted to do that.
Chair Losfeld.
Have to be questions.
Yeah, I was just thinking our slideshow needs to have the website at the end, big and bold, yeah. Anyway, this flyer that I just handed everyone has that website on the back, and it was something we had at the city booth, and we had at neighborhood meetings and stuff, so we're trying to get them out there. If anybody is going to be at some community meeting or talking to their neighbors and wants some more, I'm happy to share.
Commissioner Sherman, I heard your voice in there. If you have a quick question you want to raise before we.
Yeah, just a clarifying comment, since Councilor Heisey asked if I happen to have that random factoid in my memory, which I didn't, but I found City Manager Ober's memo to council, which references that Milwaukie currently offers 3.93 acres of dedicated parkland per 1,000 residents. And in comparison, the state of Oregon's comprehensive outdoor recreation plan recommends a minimum of 6.25 acres to 13.5 acres of public parkland per 1,000 residents. So as Councilor Heisey was mentioning, we're fairly deficient by those state standards.
Thank you. All right, let's continue then. Okay, Councilor Beatty, would you like to start?
Well, I just was up here to help field questions that may come up. I guess
sure.
I would say, I think Councilor Heisey did a great job covering everything. The one thing I would say, because it's come up in other meetings, is people feel like this is new, it's sudden. And I understand why people feel like it's sudden, because we didn't start having a public conversation about this until this summer, but it's really not that sudden. It's been building from my perspective, it's been building for the 3 years that they've been stonewalling on Milwaukie Bay Park. If you look at the NCPRD recently updated their website within the last month, but a month ago, if you looked at their website, it's on their Milwaukie Bay Park page, it said it was going to start building and start construction in 2020. So even their own website admitted that they have been delaying and delaying and delaying. But beyond that issue, the more I talk to people who were formerly on the Parks and Recreation Board, Lisa Gunyon-Rinker, Lisa Lashbrook, other people, I realized that there has been some interest in leaving the Parks District for many, many years by people who have served on our Parks Board and dealt with some of those issues. So it feels sudden to people. I appreciate that, but it's really not that sudden.
Yeah, and a lot of these conversations have been happening in the public sphere, but have not been particularly interesting. So they haven't necessarily caught people's attention. It's unusual for elected officials to go to another elected's meeting to offer public testimony, but all of us on council have done that more than once to the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners in the past year. asking for them to move things along and expressing our frustrations in a polite manner. We have also had numerous district advisory committee meetings, which are public, and the DAC is the sort of intermediary body. There are a couple of Milwaukie folks that sit on it. It's kind of like a Parks and Recreation board for NCPRD. They have been discussing this for some time. That is another space where City Council has been showing up. Councilor Nicodemus serves on the DAC as an elected official. He has been expressing concerns for some time. It's just not something that really catches people's eyes because not many eyes watch for those sorts of meetings.
And I've heard some concerns from Councilor Nicodemus and others about the DAC potentially trying to revise, I don't know whether it's their bylaws or some of their procedures to potentially take some of the SDCs that we have generated for the district and maybe spend them outside of our city. Can you share more information about that?
Yeah. Do you want to take that one? Do you want me to take that one?
I can. Traditionally, NCPRD has had zoned SDCs, so the SDCs were to be spent in the zone where they are generated, and they are looking to eliminate that zone so that they have the flexibility to move SDCs out of Milwaukie. And I will also say, for those of you who know Wilda Parks, when she was on council, she was our rep to the DAC and was involved for like a 2 or 3 year period with the whole process of establishing the new DAC and what the, how it was going to be staffed and how members were going to be selected and everything. And I would invite you to consult with her. She also has had these frustrations for several years. So, yeah.
And I'll just add on the system development charges, that is money that is created, if anyone happens to be watching, I know you all know, that's money that is effectively created by the creation of new buildings. So when a builder builds a building, they pay system development charges to help fund the fact that that building has a footprint in the community. And it can be, there are system development charges for stormwater, for parks, for sidewalk improvements, all sorts of different things, streets. So with this influx of new units coming into Milwaukie, we're looking at the generation of potentially as much as over $3 million in system development charges. And that is a lot more SDC funding. Anyway, it's a lot more money than we're used to seeing come in to Milwaukie, and to not have those funds be directed to the immediate area where they are being generated in this instance in particular is very hard to contemplate, because we really do need to have parks available for those residents in those urban core areas. These are all going to be apartments. This is not going to be development where people have backyards. So we are very concerned about this. And the last we heard about SDCs and what Councilor Beatty was describing, it was going to be as soon as January that they changed their approach to SDCs and pooled all of the SDCs.
Chair.
Vice Chair Edge, I see your hand is raised.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, councilors. It's a good presentation. Obviously it's an interesting subject, even if you think it's not very flashy. But what I'm curious about is, it's always been my understanding that the 54 cents per thousand tax rate is just painfully low. If you look at Tualatin Hills Parks and Recreation District, theirs is $1.59 per thousand compared to 54 cents. Portland Parks levy recently, I think, was 80 cents, per thousand. And so I'm wondering what, I'm encouraged that and thinks that we can do better, with our staff, in-house at the 54 cents rate than the special district can. But is that really enough? And, particularly when, what is that really going to cover? Is that going to cover natural areas and habitat? Because that's something that NCPRD is supposed to be handling for us as well. It's a big part of our, land use policy portfolio and our updated comprehensive plan. How are we going to make sure that we have adequate funding for natural areas in addition to people-focused parks?
I guess I would say, as a resident who lives close to our natural area that is currently under NCPRD's management, that being Elk Rock Island and Spring Park, they try really hard to do what they can, and they do what they can, but I wouldn't say that it is a strong management plan that we are seeing executed by NCPRD in our natural areas. And I would also say that I'm not entirely sure which natural areas you're thinking about, if you're thinking about something that's outside of the 16 parks, or or are you thinking about natural areas that are within parks, which would mostly be Elk Rock Island, North Clackamas Parks, Fernburg?
Yeah.
Those are kind of the three places where we have natural areas. Is there another category of land that I'm missing?
Yeah, in particular, with, again, focusing on our comprehensive plan policies, there are a lot of policies that call for connected habitat, more wildlife crossings, being able to, creating, pollinator habitat in different spaces. And, so there's all kinds of different habitat needs that our policies are calling for that are not maybe being met at all right now, but that we have ambitions for. Yeah. And, I guess I'm not sure, where that funding was going to come from anyway, or what role the special district might have had in managing any of that land anyway.
Right.
But ultimately, when we look at these, we tend to associate natural areas, habitat spaces with parklands. And so really, as we start to do more in the space of connected habitat and, how are we going to make sure we have the resources for that? Is that a separate conversation altogether, perhaps? And then again, coming back to it, is that 54 cents even adequate really to do what we want to do with, the parks that we already have?
So I would say that I can't speak to the 54 cents question specific to that, but I would say that money is a way that we express our values. That's a way that I've heard Anne talk about our city budget, and I think it's spot on. And so if we are the people making decisions around how money is being spent in parks, I think that gives us a greater opportunity to make sure that those values are expressed and that we are building habitat connectivity in, and we are putting in the pollinator gardens. You'll see in the 3 parks that we are currently designing, if you've looked at that work, all of them feature natural features in some way, whether it's nature play or actually there is a pollinator garden outlined in a couple of them. That is very much coming up in the parks design process as we're talking to Milwaukie residents. And I think that reflects how parks management would be done under Milwaukie, because we just have that closer connection. Right now, it's very difficult for us to say, let's stop using pesticides in all of our parks, or let's put a pollinator garden in every park in Milwaukie, because we aren't the ones who do the maintenance work. And so we aren't the ones who really are empowered to make those decisions about what happens in our parks. And a lot of basically any land that the city owns that is not within our 16 parks is already being managed by our Public Works Department. There's a number of retention pond areas and other places in the city where we have open spaces that serve other purposes, and those are being managed. What's the name of the one where we did the ivy pole?
Out in Lake Road neighborhood, yeah, I can't remember the name of it, but it is attached to a retention pond, and I know there's some look at doing some restoration around the Roswell ponds in the Ardenwell neighborhood. I do think there are some big plots that the city has for stormwater and other things that are areas that city staff is already working on, but is starting to use for Earth Day events and things like that to get people involved in making them better habitat. And we'll go toward that habitat connectivity goal that aren't, they're not parks, they're city property already. The other thing I would say is that, now I've just lost my train of thought. I think the staff, we do have a staff now focused on that natural area element of city property. I had another point I wanted to make, and I can't think of it. There was something that Joseph asked, though.
Well, I can talk about the 54 cents per thousand while you think about it. And you're right, 54 cents per thousand is very low. It's, I think, the lowest rate in the state. It's not a lot of money, and I share your surprise that we could do the work. I also have to be honest that I think that we would probably want to at some point look at increasing it. But again, that would be subject to a vote of the people. And we are confident that we could start this process, that first 5-year levy, we could make it work at 54 cents per thousand. And part of the master planning process that we would undertake as part of creating the Parks District would be looking at what is an appropriate SDC rate for Milwaukie. So that would be a way to think about future parks development and land purchase and all of the things that SDCs pay for. And it would be an opportunity for the community to go, what do we want out of our Parks Department, and how much are we willing to pay for it? So it would be a big conversation we would have to have. And I don't know if residents can afford to pay more than 54 cents per thousand, but it would be up to them to make that choice.
Chair, if I may.
Yes, Commissioner Massey.
Yeah, thank you. Why is the county commission slowing this down and thwarting the desire of the Milwaukie citizens?
I think in some degree it's about funding the Concord School project. And that's part of their motivation for wanting the SDCs to be able to be pulled wherever they want it to go. I will tell you, only one county commissioner lives in the district, and that's Commissioner Savas. And so he's the one who sits at the DAC meetings. He's not a voting member of the DAC. He's the one who is there day in and day out, or month in and month out, and who has been really driving the policy at the county commission, because the other commissioners don't live in the district and they kind of defer to him.
For those who don't know, would you explain the Concord project?
Sure. There's an elementary school that's no longer used by the school district that NCPRD took ownership of in a big land swap that happened as part of the settlement in Happy Valley, or around the settlement with Happy Valley. It's a school in the Oak Grove on Concord Avenue. It's a cool historic building. They have a big plan for a community center there. It'd be a great project. I mean, I hope they can build it. But it's a $30 million project or more. That building has to be seismically upgraded. It has a very big price tag. It will be a great project if they get it built, but they shouldn't get it built at the cost of taking all the resources away from Milwaukie. And they haven't been willing to put out we piecemealed, as Councilor Heisey alluded to, we piecemealed Milwaukie Bay Park. We had a phase 1 like 12 years ago. Then we had a phase 2, which is the current boat ramp and parking that you see in the big lawn. That opened in 2015. Milwaukie could never do it all, never had the money to do it all at once. We piecemealed it. And then we got to this third phase and we thought we had an agreement about shared funding between us and the county and grants that were obtained from the state, et cetera. And then that has all gone by the wayside in the last 3 years. But with Concord School, they don't talk about, well, maybe they are talking about staging it at this point, but they haven't been willing to put it out to the voters. You know, we put our library out to the voters. We wanted a new library, and we asked the voters, are you willing to support a bond measure to build a new library? That's probably what they need to do for Concord School. It's such a big project, but they haven't gone that direction. They're instead trying to pull in money from everywhere, including depriving Milwaukie projects of support.
Thank you.
I will also say that there's this false narrative of us versus them that you often hear between folks who are outside of Milwaukie, but in the Parks District, feeling like Milwaukie gets all the stuff. We get all the parks, we get things built. And what's not necessarily apparent is that that's happening because of all of that work that I highlighted in this presentation. It is because we are putting in the extra dollars, the extra staff time, the extra effort, the extra engagement with the community to make that happen. It is not because Milwaukie is getting extra from the district. We want to see parks built in the rest of NCPRD. We really do. This is not about trying to get more than is ours.
Well, and I think as Vice Chair Edge and some of his colleagues working on Oak Lodge governance project would know, we do get more things in Milwaukie, and that's because we've chose to be a city and we've chose to pay more money for those things. And so to hold that against us, you know, that's an unfortunate choice.
Do commissioners have any other questions or comments before we move on in our agenda this evening?
I have one. My question will be very short, I promise.
No, you don't. Continue.
He promises, you just don't believe him.
If BCC is a problem, why not create its own board of governors?
They did put that to the voters in 2014 to create a separate board of governors and actually to raise the rate. That was a very complicated thing that did not pass with the voters. I don't think it was that voters suddenly said, oh, we don't want a separate board, but it was not presented in a very clear and understandable way, and it was combined with the raising the rate, and so both things failed. And there's been, as far as I know, and I follow them pretty closely. There's been no effort to, revive either of those discussions.
And so why wouldn't we revive that if the problem is the Board of County Commissioners?
Well, we don't get to make that call. It's the Board of County Commissioners. And we have an election coming up that could dramatically change the makeup of the board. Everyone please vote and vote all the way down the ballot. So we don't know what the future holds around that. And it could well be that there is something that goes on the ballot around reformulating the district. I would expect that if that happens, and if Commissioner Savas is still involved in some way, that he would run and want to be appointed to that board. And given the amount of power he has wielded in these conversations for such a long time now, I am not sure that having a different structure would necessarily serve Milwaukie better.
I have a quick comment. I just wanted to say thank you guys very much for the presentation, and also thank you a lot for the online community engagement, because I did see the conversations, and it is nice to see that the community does have a lot of input and discussions directly with our local representatives. And also I hear that even in your presentation, or I don't know if it was already there, but there was a lot of things that then we kind of gauge from community comments and feedback. I think that the presentation was great, and if I can help edit that down and put it out in the public more to help in any way, or expand the conversation, then that would be great. And then I also really appreciated that statistic that you pulled up. I did not realize that we were so low on especially with the growth that's happening, and so. Thank you for the presentation.
We have a lot of parks by number, but they're all very small.
Yeah.
Or most of them are very small, which is great for having neighborhood parks. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
They are, yeah.
Yeah. And to your point, I just want to say that we did intend to put this on the ballot in November initially, and we pulled back in part because of those conversations online, and in realizing that this was not fully baked in our conversations with the community yet. So I appreciate having that feedback and the opportunity to hear those questions.
I want to thank you both for staying. Oh, Vice Chair Edge, before I
just wanted to follow up and see if Councilor Beatty remembered what she was going to say.
No, I think it was about master planning. I mean, I do think, it was that, we would engage, if the 5-year levy passes and we do leave the district, we would engage in a master planning process. NCPRD hasn't actually engaged in a master planning process in like 15 years. I participated like 15 years ago in their last master planning process out at the Milwaukie Center. So I do think that will be the time where we have the community conversations about whether 54 cents is enough, about whether the community wants, since I've been on council, I've heard we need a skate park. In recent years, I've heard we need pickleball courts, swimming pools, other things. So, the master planning process would be the place where we could have those conversations about what it is Milwaukeeans really want, and whether and how we would fund them. I will note, I just recently learned, Happy Valley left. They have, I think they're still doing 54 cents per thousand. In fact, they're renewing that this year, but their SDC went up, doubled. It doubled when they are, building out parks, but they do have a plan. They have been working on a plan for a community center with a pool, and they have acknowledged that they don't have funding for that, and that they've got to figure out as a community how they would fund that, because they can't fund that from their 54 cents per thousand. And their larger SDCs get them part of the way there, but not necessarily all the way there.
Chair Losfeld, if I may, real quick, I think as Councilor Beatty was saying, and I looked at this last night and sent it to Peter Passarelli, but our SDCs are painfully low. Just as our 54 cents per thousand might be some of the lowest in the state, our parks SDCs might be some of the lowest as well, particularly in the region. But of course, that would be driven by what is a master plan and then what's figuring out the gap. The other thing I just wanted to say, in regards to Vice Chair Edge's question about natural areas and thinking about parks, is for folks who've spent time thinking about removing Kellogg Creek Dam, there is a massive opportunity for natural area park space there, with the city as the primary landholder of all the land underneath the lake. So, thinking about opportunities for some of the things that you were talking about, Vice Chair Edge, I think is one of those things we should not lose sight of as we're thinking about the future of our parks.
Yeah.
All right. I want to make one note. Something that I learned this week and want to share with you all is the suggestion that we stop using the terminology master plan. As you all know, the term master is derived and has significant meanings to some of our community members. And I would suggest that we start using phrases like developmental plan. Whatever it may be, I would suggest that we discontinue the phrase master plan. And I'll leave you with that.
I'll second that. I think that's a great idea. Thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you both again for staying up late and for coming out for yet another public
It's not
engagement.
late. It's not for us. We're night
That's
owls.
right. You know what? Stick around. We go. We'll get there.
Second thought. Thank you for having us, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
When was the town hall again?
November 10th.
Yeah.
At the library.
November 10th at the library.
Closed that email long ago.
Okay.
I think it's 6 to 7:30.
Okay.
Is what I remember.
Okay.
Lisa.
All right. Moving on to our next hearing item, or to our first hearing item, rather, which would be code amendments. EV charging HB 2180. The public hearing on ZA-2022-006 is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider legislative amendments to conform with Oregon House Bill 2180, HB 2180. Do we have someone at the desk that I cannot see, or is staff? This is staff. It's going to be staff. Okay, great. If you are here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and relevant criteria, and to avoid repetition and not relevant information. The Planning Commission will make a recommendation to council regarding whether the proposal conforms with all of the city's applicable criteria. I now ask staff to cite the zoning ordinance section or sections where criteria can be found.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The two applicable sections are from Milwaukie Municipal Code, Section 19.902, amendments to maps and ordinances, and Section 19.1008 for Type 5 or legislative review.
Thank you. Now for commissioner participation. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest?
No.
No.
Okay. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain?
No.
No.
Oh, okay. Staff report. Let's proceed to the staff presentation, please.
Okay, thank you. All right, good evening. Senior Planner Brett Kelfer. I'm here with Adam Hero, Associate Planner, and we're going to walk you back through something that we had a recent work session with you for, and that's with respect to establishing some new requirements for electric vehicle or EV charging infrastructure. Try to move quickly here because I think everyone's fairly familiar with this by now, but for our viewing or listening public, just to cover some of the basic points of how we got here and where we're going. The proposal is coming from two recent state actions, the passage of a House Bill 2180, and also some new rulemaking with respect to climate-friendly and equitable communities. That's where these requirements are being generated and setting kind of a statewide minimum that that jurisdictions like Milwaukie are being required to adopt. The requirements related to the House bill are already in effect. They're being implemented through our building code and went into effect on July 1st of this year, but the climate-friendly rules are required to be adopted locally by the end of March of the coming year. And kind of to compare or identify the differences and similarities between these two things. As I noted, the House bill is being implemented more through our building code. And these are both applying to new construction. They both apply to residential and mixed-use buildings. And they both set some minimum requirements for establishing at least the capacity for electric vehicle charging. just to cover the basis of some of the differences in some of the terms that we'll use with respect to the different levels of charging. What's understood to be level 1 is something that could be done through plugging into just a regular electrical outlet. It's something that results in a very slow charging time, potentially a couple days, depending on the type of vehicle and the charging that you have. Level 2, which these requirements focus on, is the kind of charging that you might see most often kind of in a home or potentially at a commercial spot where the expectation is people would be there for a while, but the charging could happen in a matter of hours or potentially overnight, and it does require a specific outlet, something more like what you plug a dryer into, that level of capacity. The level 3 charging is what I think we're starting to find more and more, and what we're expecting and hoping to see with kind of the more widespread grid of charging infrastructure across the nation. That is places along some of our highways where you could pull in for 15, 20, 30 minutes and get a really rapid charge. So very high capacity, quick charge to help people keep moving. And then the terms that we're using that relate to these amendments in particular, the phrase we're keying on is what's called EV capable. And the idea is that we're having conduit installed and making sure there's space at the electrical panel for these new developments for the percentages that are required, not that there would be a charger installed or not even that there would necessarily be wiring there. That's what we get at with the term EV ready. So that is, we are having wiring installed and potentially some kind of an outlet, but still not a charger. And then the EV installed phrase is meant to relate to the actual installation of a charger. So it's everything. You have the conduit, the wiring, and an actual charger that you could roll up to with your electric vehicle, plug in and get a charge. So to just summarize what the new rules would require is a total of 40% of new parking spaces, and this is the specific figure with respect to the multi-unit residential or mixed-use buildings that have a minimum of 5 units. 40% of any parking spaces that are provided would have to have that EV charging capacity. That is, they've got the conduit, they've got space at the panel for a level 2 charging. The figure is 20% actually for commercial, new commercial construction. The idea is that, again, that you're providing the infrastructure that will be needed as more and more EVs come online, and with the recognition that it's cheaper to do that now than to retrofit later. And a clarification that we made in the work session that we had with you is that the new state rules don't require the installation of EV chargers, just the capacity for it. And that, as we understand it, relates to some other rules related to what you can and can't do with respect to the building code. There are other areas where we cannot require things that would actually kind of contradict or start to interfere with the building code requirements. So with that, I'll turn it over to Adam.
Thank you. So equity considerations for these, our compliance with these new rules, as far as electric vehicles go, they are known to reduce local air pollution from traffic. Whether it has a really big environmental impact does depend on the source of the electricity. So if you're plugging into renewable energies, it's an even bigger impact overall. We know now that 80% of EV charging does occur at home. And we also know that homeowners are 3 times more likely to own EVs, and that renters often lack access to EV charging at their rental homes. We also know that this rule set is likely to increase EV access for renters. And with recent federal subsidies that we've seen come through some of the recent bills that have been passed by Congress and signed by the president, purchasing a new or used EV is cheaper than it has been pretty much ever. And we also know that these rules, based on an economic study that Portland did for a similar level of EV capable requirement, that it was going to impact rent levels less than 1%. So we feel pretty confident that that is true here in Milwaukee as well. And while a lot of these actions here are steps toward an equitable EV future, there's a lot of gaps that do remain for ensuring equitable access, once we're done with these rules. And we can go to the next slide. So here's, what the climate action plan actually says about electric vehicles now. There are several other, the first one up here, electric vehicle rating zoning regulations. That's what we're here for today. And then there's several other actions that have been proposed, creating a program to install EV charging infrastructure at multi-unit housing complexes, developing incentives for workplace EV charging, and also supporting outreach that encourages that shift to electric vehicles. At the August 16 work session for City Council, they expressed support for increased requirements beyond what the minimum climate-friendly and equitable communities and House Bill 2180 standards require, and also directed us to develop compliance options that prioritize installed chargers. So here you have our chart. At the top here, you've got the minimum compliance requirement based on the new rules, and below that we have what staff is proposing as compliance options for both commercial and residential new development. Under the scenario that we have here, applicants would be able to choose between providing an expanded number of EV capable spaces. So that would be 100% for residential and 50% for commercial, or they could meet the minimum number of EV capable spaces required by the new state rules if they are willing to include a certain percentage of installed chargers. And what we are proposing is 5% for commercial properties for those installed chargers and 10% for residential developments. And those do count toward the EV capable percentage number, the spaces with installed chargers. And, given the variability and the cost of an EV capable space, factors dealing with structured parking versus surface parking, how big are the raceways, how long is the conduit, there are a lot of things at play, but also we try to calibrate these so that the rules should really include a very attractive option that includes installed chargers. So here is the approval criteria for Type 5 code amendments. So the code 19902-5B requires consistency with other parts of the Milwaukie Municipal Code, the goals and policies of the comp plan, the Metro Urban Growth Management Functional Plan, state statutes and statewide planning goals, as well as relevant federal regulations. So here are the decision-making options before the commission tonight. Number one, recommend approval of the proposed amendments as presented with the recommended findings in support of the approval. Two, recommend approval of the proposed amendments with revisions, revising the recommended findings as needed. Or three, continue the hearing, knowing that we are required by the state to adopt these new code amendments by March 31st, 2023. And, staff recommends that the commission forward a recommendation to council to approve the proposed amendments with the options that we've suggested to incentivize EV charger installation.
So that's the essence of our presentation. Just a reminder, I guess, for context that, this is an official public hearing, and the Planning Commission's role in the legislative process is to provide an official recommendation to the City Council. We have tentatively scheduled a hearing with the City Council to consider adoption of the amendments on November 15th. So assuming that you're able to come to the decision about a recommendation, we'll move forward with that date in mind. So I guess we're interested to hear if you have any questions about the materials that were in the staff report or the proposal in general for the amendments.
Thank you, staff. Appreciate that report. I'll ask commissioners if there are any questions. And if you're at the dais and you have a question, speak up because I can't see you.
Chair, if I may.
Yes, Commissioner Hemer.
I just want to make sure that the graph that you gave us with the option A, option B on it, that is what is proposed into the, right? That's not the same one that we saw last week that had 4 different, I just get confused because there seems like there's a lot of options and I just want to make sure.
Yeah, this is an updated chart. We kind of picked, the numbers that we thought made the most sense for achieving the council goals and based on the feedback. So there's a little mix and match going on from those 4 options that were there at the last work session.
Yeah, so it's similar to the chart you saw before, just a little more simplified in that last time we presented the minimum requirements and 2 different options, looking at different percentages. This time we're presenting the minimum and then kind of the primary recommended option.
I don't have any questions, but just hearing Commissioner Hemer's question and looking at it again myself, thinking about including it in code, it might just help the reader, thinking about the developer. If you broke it into a commercial table, one table, and a second residential table, as opposed to having them together, I think that might be one of the things that just takes a little bit more to navigate it and think about it. But I don't have any questions other than that comment.
Yeah, to clarify, thank you for that point. The actual code amendments are rather small. I mean, they're included as kind of along with the findings, and it's really, I think we've put it on kind of a single page, and it would actually be much more texty. It actually has the requirement and option for residential and mixed use, and then the requirement and option for commercial. The table is a little more complicated because what we were trying to show was the impact that the new rules would have depending on the size of the parking area that's being provided. So fair point. It's a lot of numbers to look at, but it's not what's going to be
Okay,
in the code text itself.
thanks.
Yeah, the code is in the packet and it's simple.
Chair, if I may.
Yes, Commissioner Massey.
So I guess my question is, how does this new proposal square with the building code restrictions that were described earlier by the state?
Yeah, good question. So because we are providing with the recommended code the option of installing chargers and not requiring the installation of chargers, that's how we're able to not be subverting the building code. So the idea is your option with your new residential building, let's say, is you can either provide 100% of the spaces with EV capability, or you can reduce significantly the percentage of spaces that you're making EV capable if you install actual EV chargers. So the fact that we're providing the option and not requiring chargers to be installed is what we understand is legally keeping us from running afoul of a larger requirement.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation.
Other commissioners with questions? Great. I will ask if we have received any correspondence on the matter other than those that were included in the meeting packet.
Yeah, we have not.
Okay. I will then ask whether or not it's appropriate to take audience testimony. Do we have members in the audience?
Well, we have one person in the audience, and we have 2 people who are in the attendee category online.
Great. Okay.
I'll look to the audience member to see if he wants to participate. He's indicating no, and we'll give maybe just a moment for, I think one of the people is on the phone, and I can't remember if there's a star number combination to hit. If you want to, quote, raise your hand with the phone.
Right. So on the phone, well, there's definitely the raise your hand function and then *9, I believe.
Okay, I'll open a channel if they would like to talk for 5 or 10 seconds. Oh, and
Is that you?
Oh, that was you. Okay. Okay, all right. The call-in person is actually here in the audience as well, so indicating he's not interested. And
We're
the other
only
person,
covering the meeting this
Yes.
evening. That's good.
Our
That's
other
good.
attendee is Elizabeth Decker, who's our consultant with the other item for downtown design review. So
Okay. Then with that, I will move beyond audience participation and rebuttal, and then closure of the public hearing. The public testimony portion of this hearing on ZA-2022-006 code amendments EV charging HB 2180 is now closed. The discussion amongst the commission. Yes, Vice Chair Edge.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very impressed with staff that they were able to fit all of these code amendments onto one page. When does that ever happen? Anyways, very concise. It's super easy to read. I respect that the chart is a little busy. But yeah, this is very straightforward. I think that we've done, I think staff has done a really good job of, balancing, council's goals with, what we can actually require. I think this is good. And so, I'd be happy to vote to recommend approval of these to the city council tonight.
Thank you. Vice Chair Edge, is there anyone else? I'll just say that I have appreciated the amount of detail and willingness of staff to meet the suggestions for clarity and provide additional work sessions for conversation about this. So I would also say that I would be in support of a motion and recommendation to council. Are there others?
I think Chair Losfeld's Commissioner Sherman, and I think like the both of you, I'm also impressed and appreciate staff's work on this. I like the two pathways that have been created, and I'm ready to move forward on it as well.
Okay, well, if there are, did I hear someone say same or?
Yes.
Okay, that works. I will take a motion then.
I move to approve ZA-2022-006.
Second.
It's been motioned and seconded. All those in favor, please state aye.
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 All right, and all those opposed? Okay, it looks to be unanimous, although Greg, I did not get, Commissioner Miller, I did
No,
not see a
I'm
vote.
sorry. I was just making sure that the words were corrected, that it was a recommendation to forward to council, but I'm sure that he did it, and I did not see the zoning number, so that's what I was looking at. This is my favorite part about this, because the state of Oregon is no longer requiring parking. This may all just be moot. So.
There's always an if.
Always in it.
All right, the decision is a recommendation to city council, which we will make the final decision after the public hearing. Please see planning staff for details concerning the city council hearing date and process. I'll move on to our next hearing item, which is code amendments and the downtown design review. The public hearing of ZA-2022-003 is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider the legislative amendment to update the downtown design review code language and review process. If you are here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria, and to avoid repetitive and not relevant information. The Planning Commission will make a recommendation to council regarding whether the proposal conforms with all of the city's applicable criteria. I now ask staff to cite the zoning ordinance sections where the criteria can be found.
thank you, Chair. Similar to the previous one, the same two sections from the Milwaukie Municipal Code, Section 19.902, amendments to maps and ordinances, and Section 19.1008, Type 5, legislative review.
Thank you. And now for participation from commissioners. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest?
No.
No.
Thank you. And does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain?
No.
Great. Let's proceed to the staff report.
All right. All right, thank you, Chair, Commissioners. I'm still Brett Kelver, and I'm going to walk you through this set of proposed amendments. This is a little more wordy, a little more pagination in our packet. Unfortunately, that's just the nature of the beast on this when we are talking about downtown design review and amending several sections of the code related to that. And again, we were fortunate to be able to have the opportunity to talk with you in several work sessions before now, so I'll try to move quickly, but just to recap some of the basics for people who might be coming to the conversation new. There are three primary sections in our existing code that relate to the design of downtown buildings. One of them is in the section 19.304, where the development standards are. Primarily, those standards address some of the actual physical aspects of the building, height, how far they have to be set back from property lines, how much of the lot they can take up with respect to floor area ratio. Also, section 19.508, which is really the heart of the design review piece. These are actual downtown design standards that are looking at things like exterior building materials, facade treatments, relationship to other buildings, weather protection, that kind of thing. And then the actual engine of the downtown design review process is 19.907. That is what outlines what different actions get what type of review and establishes the approval criteria. But one of the current issues with the current process is that we do have a separate design guidelines document that lives outside the code and was kind of adopted as a reference or an ancillary document that deals with certain other categories of guidelines related to things like architecture, pedestrian emphasis, Milwaukie character. And just to talk a little bit more about some of the problems that we've had with the code over time, the existence of a separate document outside the code with guidelines that do not match the ones that are provided in section 19.508 has resulted in some gaps. It's made it a little more confusing and a little bit harder for developers to understand what to address, staff in terms of how to prepare a report about a project, and for decision makers in the public to understand exactly what they should be reviewing and considering for new projects. So we've been dealing with some of this, when to apply the guidelines in some sections, and there have been cases in the past where because some of the standards that actually relate to design are in a section, in section 19.304, so for development standards. And so when a project hasn't been able to meet those, instead of being able to be reviewed by the Planning Commission through just the regular design review process, they've actually needed a variance, which has kind of seemed a little bit clunky and awkward. So what we have done, and when I say we, I would include the city's Design and Landmarks Committee, has been working on this project for several years. It started innocently enough trying to refresh some of the images and photos that were in the design guidelines document. And as Chair Loosevelt can attest, once we got into the detail a little bit more, it raised questions about why are we not fixing more of this document to make it work better. So that's how we've ended up addressing these three different sections of the code, trying to provide a better alignment of the design standards with the design guidelines, and try to get a little bit clear about the paths for review that we're required to actually offer for certain types of development, like residential housing downtown, to offer a clear and objective track, and then also a more discretionary review track when the standards can't be met or someone's coming with a much more creative or unconventional design. And so part of what we're proposing is to also just repeal the design guidelines document, so to get it out of play and pull the essential parts of it into the code. So highlights of the things that are included in the proposed amendments are basically to move some of the development standards in 19.304 that actually relate more to design, to pull them into section 19.508 so that they can be addressed more clearly as part of the design review process. That involves only making the code more complicated in the sense that while we have 7 design elements right now in 19.508 and we're expanding that to 14, it's a higher number, but the idea is it's actually being more specific and more clear about grouping the elements that are already needing to be reviewed. One of the things that was a key point and recommendation by the DLC and that this group has discussed is the importance of requiring that multifamily buildings that are being constructed downtown, while they currently have the option to address the more generic multifamily design standards of a project that could be built anywhere in the city, to ensure that those buildings, when they're proposed downtown, that they actually are forced to address the same kinds of design standards that other buildings in the downtown are. So that was a key recommendation. We also felt that along those lines, while we're trying to clarify that what the design standards are, that if you as a new building meet those standards, that just like a multifamily building downtown, a mixed-use building, a new some kind of more commercial building should also have that option of just, I met the standards, get type 1 review and move forward. Part of what we've also done is to in fact refresh some of the images, some of the graphics that are in the code. We had our last conversation about this in a work session at the end of September 27th. We had some really good, helpful, and clarifying conversation for us, and I just want to recap quickly some of the things that came out of that discussion. One thing that we did was we have gone ahead and tried to clarify the actions that require different types of review. And this for the type 1 piece, the more we looked at this, the more it seemed like we had a pre-existing list of 11 specific different actions that were lined out for type 1 review, for example. And what we determined was that the idea was, the point is, if you meet the standards, whatever action you are, then you should get type 1 review. And so rather than trying to be so specific about some of these different actions, including some for which there are no actual standards, like changes of existing grade, to simply clarify that type 1 review is for any kind of activity, new development, expansions, other things that meet the standards. We had quite a conversation about the 6-foot step back requirement and got the clear message from Planning Commission that it was important to keep that requirement for now. So we've done that with the proposed amendments. There was also a really helpful discussion about the question of how to address blank walls. This was in the context of public art, but one of the things that we got really specific about was clarifying that street-facing facades and also facades visible from the street needed to be addressed so that we didn't necessarily get stuck with walls that weren't having to either provide some kind of landscaping or a mural or some kind of public art treatment. And so we've addressed that in the new, the latest version of the requirements. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that if needed. One other small item that came up in the interim, we talked about this issue of not trying to use both feet and stories as measures of height. And we had a pretty clear and simple discussion about that last time. When we were looking at that section of, I think it's 19.304, the floor area ratio, current maximum in the code is 4:1. So the idea is that in a situation where I'm actually covering most of a downtown lot with a building, the idea with the floor area ratio is it's basically how it relates a little bit to how many stories a building could be. When the higher the ratio is, the higher the building is in order to hit that. And recognizing that with the height bonuses that are allowed downtown right now, you could in some parts of town go up to 5 or 6 stories if you're taking advantage of the height bonuses that are allowed. And although we haven't run into this problem yet, maybe in part by mistake, the fact that the maximum FAR is currently 4:1 means that if I was in an area where I could get up to 6 stories because I'm taking advantage of height bonuses, right now I would technically need a variance to exceed the floor area ratio because I'm at 6 stories and 6:1 instead of 4:1. So this, I think we put in the same category as get rid of stories, let's just focus on feet. This seemed to be a fix that is almost like a housekeeping thing that will keep us out of having to go through the variance process for folks when are already considering their building in the designer.
And just to make sure, this doesn't mean that every building then could be 6 stories tall.
Correct. It's a maximum floor area ratio standard. So you would have to do other things like take advantage of height bonuses to get anywhere in the neighborhood of hitting that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I guess finally, we want to be clear about a couple of things we heard from the Planning Commission in both the last work session, I think a prior one. One that was very clear at the September 27th work session was that there's a strong interest in looking at having council ask staff to look at developing some kind of a process for actually requiring public art to be integrated into new buildings. So that's something that, as we noted in the staff report, just seemed to be a little beyond the scope of this project for now, but we wanted to acknowledge that we'll pass that recommendation on to the council. Also, when we were talking about public notice in the context of new buildings, we had some discussion at the last work session about different methods for doing that. There was also some interest at a previous work session about trying to find ways to get the neighborhood district associations and the public in general involved in the development process earlier, giving them an opportunity to actually have some face time with developers. And that also, for some of the reasons we've explained in the staff reports, seemed a little beyond the scope of this project, but we wanted to indicate that we'd be making that recommendation or putting that forward to the council as well. So kind of passing your recommendation along. I don't know if as part of your discussion tonight, if there are other things, we'll try to capture those if there are other recommendations that you want to make. But for the rest of the presentation, just kind of recapping what we talked about for the previous one for EV charging, the basic approval criteria are showing consistency with several different categories of rules and regulations, whether they're at the city level, metro, the state, and even federal. And again, the options that you have as the body making a recommendation, our recommendation tonight is that we feel pretty good about the package of amendments that we've pulled together in response to the work session discussions that we've had. But if you feel that you want to make some adjustments to that, we just try to capture those and adjust the findings. If you feel like you need more time, we can do that. Although we also tentatively have a hearing scheduled with the City Council on December 6th. We'll be talking with them next week, actually, in their first work session discussion. So. We're hoping that with all the discussion we've had with the commission that you'll feel comfortable making a recommendation tonight. But those are your options. And with that, I guess I just ask if you have any questions about the presentation before you get into your deliberation part.
Commissioners, are there questions? I see Vice Chair Edge, your hand is raised.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Brett. Is it fair to say that the purpose of this project is really to, this has been going on for a very long time, before our new comp plan, policies were adopted and everything. So is it fair to say that the purpose of this project is to make sure that we have standards for all the guidelines and guidelines for all the standards, and this is kind of just making sure that we have things in alignment where they really weren't before?
Yes, I would say that
rather than like a wholesale rewrite of the code.
Right. Yes. Yeah. That's a helpful question. Yeah, I think the idea overall was that this is it's a little beyond kind of a housekeeping project, because it does involve some significant movement of elements from one section of the code to the other. And as we talked about just with the 19.907 section, a lot of clarification, kind of slashing things out that seemed a little overly specific. But there's relatively little that is new. I think there are a few things, like, for example, we mentioned the blank wall standard. There wasn't really a clear standard for addressing street-facing facades that might have a certain degree of blank wall area. And so there are a few areas like that we have pulled some rules into the code, but overall it is largely rearranging, reorganizing, and clarifying a lot of the things that are in our present code, and then salvaging kind of the best and most important things from that separate design guidelines document.
And notwithstanding that, specific question and answer right there, was there, can you recount if there was much discussion from the Design and Landmarks Committee about public art standards during this process?
Yeah, I don't recall much discussion with the DLC about public art. Certainly not on the scale that the commission has talked about it with respect to the idea of trying to almost create a program or a very clear requirement for public art in every building. No.
And then just to clarify, the DLC, did the DLC recommend that we do away with the 6-foot step back?
I think the way the DLC left it was they noted it as a question that should be raised with the Planning Commission. And we came up with that one suggested option that we discussed with you in one of the work sessions, where the idea was, well, if there was some interest in relooking at the standard, but you weren't wanting to get rid of it entirely, maybe kind of a compromise might be requiring the step back from 50% of the facade. So I think if I remember correctly, and I'll ask, I pulled Elizabeth Decker, our consultant from Jet Planning, into the conversation in case she wants to chip in at some point to answer some of these things. I think we crafted that option for your consideration and discussion, but the DLC didn't have, as I recall, a strong single point recommendation about that. They were curious to see what you would think.
Perfect, thank you.
Are other commissioners needing clarification, or
Chair Roosevelt, I have one.
did you call me Chair Roosevelt?
Roosevelt, sorry.
Commissioner Hemer?
Just thinking that you were presidential is all. So Brett, does a clear and defined path then kill public art? Because it makes it seem like that in your requirement for public art, that a clear and public path actually kills public art because nobody can define what art is.
Well, I think the discussion that we tried to give in the staff report was highlighting some of the complicating factors with art that make it more difficult to put into a clear and objective category. So it's not to say that there may not be a way to figure out how to pull it into a clear and objective process, just that it seems for the effort that we're making right now and the timing that we're on, that it seems like it probably warrants a larger discussion and greater consideration. I mean, again, with the recommendation being moved forward to the commission, if the council feels very strongly about it, they can certainly ask us to slow down a little bit and try to pull something together, pull into the.
So since you bring up deadlines, when is this due by? By state law or any sort of standard? When is it due by?
This doesn't have a deadline.
Oh, okay, so we don't actually have a deadline.
Right.
I just want to make sure that the city's view, because when I read the staff report, it does seem that the city's view on this is that if we have clear and objective standards, that means that public art probably cannot be included in that. I want to make sure that that is not the city's position.
I guess I'd say that I think that we think that it would take more figuring, I think right now, a lot more figuring about how to, do something like an idea that was discussed before was find a way or a mechanism to involve the art committee. So that maybe you can create a clear and objective path by having a requirement that you enter into a process with the art mob or the art committee to satisfy your clear and objective requirements to integrate public art into the building. I'm not sure how far we'd have to go to make that truly clear and objective so that a developer didn't feel like, well, okay, I kind of got my approval right now, but I'm also kind of hung up with having to go through this other actually discretionary review process. Do they like my idea? Is my building creative enough? Or how many avenues do I have to show that I'm integrating public art? That's something I guess we'd have to explore more in terms of the legalities of it, and then just thinking through.
So you're basically saying that passing this gives us a 25% possibility that it's going to clear, or that it's going to just basically not legally not allow public art, requirement for public art. Is that what I just heard that came out of your mouth?
Let me try restating what I think you're asking. You're saying with the amendments that we've proposed,
By having a clear and distinct path, a type 1 review, does that kill any opportunity to be able to have a requirement for public art?
I don't think we know the answer to that question. I think what we do know is that we're required by law to have a type 1 review process. So we have to do that one way or the other. So I think that we haven't had the opportunity to completely explore what the program would look like, and we just have to dig into it. I don't think that we're trying to preclude anything unless somehow legally we weren't able to, but that isn't the goal. We would want to explore that.
I am sitting here as a body, and you know how I feel about public art, and I don't want to vote for something that absolutely kills it. That's why I'm asking these questions, right? And I guess if we don't know necessarily the answer to that's fine. What I also want to ask is that to what extent is it the planning department's role into writing those rules behind a requirement? If you require public art, is it the planning department's job to write the rules for the public art, or is it somebody else's department? Kind of like, when you vote on a ballot measure, it's actually the person that wrote the ballot measure then walks into a room and then negotiate out what the ballot measure was supposed to mean. Right. So you don't really know what you're voting on. So I'm just wondering, is it really actually the job of the planning department to actually write the rules for the requirements of public art?
yeah, I think I understand your question. Let me try to address both of the couple things that you've been asking about. I think that what we're trying to do with the overall amendment package, with trying to remove gaps between what were guidelines presented in a separate document and what was already in our code, and to better actualize the process that the current code even sets up, which is to say, we have design standards. If you meet the standards, you get this kind of review. If you can't meet the standards, we go through a more discretionary review process. What we've tried to do, and part of the conversation we had last time about, in both the work sessions, about recommending that we remove certain activities from needing review if we don't have standards for them, like changing the grade, building a fence, that kind of thing. If there's no standard that you're going to be reviewed against for that, then why are we doing a review? And so to answer your question about, I'm not sure I'd say, like, does this kill the opportunity for public art? But the idea is what we would need to do is we would need to develop some clear and objective standards for a public art element, I guess, to say we have some requirements. And to get to your second question, so in a way, yes, staff's job would be to try to, working with Elizabeth, getting other information, would be, let's figure out what we can line out as clear and objective requirements for meeting this public art standard that we're going to set. We'd have to establish a standard, and then we would, like we've done for the other elements, we'd have a purpose statement for this. Like, what are we after with having a public art requirement? It needs to do these kinds of things to contribute in a certain way to downtown Milwaukee. We'd have to establish some standards, and that's what I think we're saying we're struggling with a little bit. And then I think, it might be actually a little bit easier to establish some guidelines. So let's say you aren't able to meet whatever clear and objective standards we do set for public art, and you say, I'll deal with it in the type 3. Let's talk about it with the Planning Commission. We'd want to have some guidelines to say, kind of building off the purpose statement for that element, say, what's public art supposed to be achieving? What kinds of things are we looking for? Maybe it outlines some options or suggestions. Could be the whole building, could be a sculpture, could be, a landscaping downspout, stormwater feature, something like that. So I don't know that it's impossible for us to develop some clear and objective standards for public art. It doesn't seem as immediately accessible as the standards we've been able to develop for some other things, like what kinds of building materials should you use and shouldn't use. So I don't know if that helps. address some of your questions.
I think that is helpful. I think maybe not speaking for Commissioner Hemer, but I think a little bit of my own perspective is, as Commissioner Hemer shared, there's been many conversations over the past 20 years about wanting to see more art and those kinds of things. And I think that I find some of the questions in the staff report to feel a little bit like a red herring of sorts, because, we go through these convoluted conversations in type 3 where what is a public benefit? And what is a public benefit more often than not is what the applicant tells us what it is. And then we weigh that. And sometimes we end up with a piece of metal on the side of a building because that's better than just a blank wall. I think we could set a process where where an applicant and their creative team of architects and designers could tell us what the art is, and we could say you've met the art requirement, just as we've done in other more subjective places.
If I may, though, that you are addressing precisely the discretionary or subjective review part of it. And so I think the challenge that Commissioner Hemer is getting at is, could we, as staff and as a group, as a commission, could we come up with some actual clear standards that don't have to come, doesn't bring the discussion to the Planning Commission, that the idea is the applicant can show staff in a very clear way, I'm meeting your standards for public art in this way. And that's where it feels a little more challenging to do that because of the, by its nature, kind of subjectiveness of art.
Sure. But I think to the point of standards, I think you could say, an applicant should have a mural of no smaller than 3 feet by 9 feet. Doesn't have to say what is on that mural and whether that counts as art, or a statue of no smaller than X, X size, or other piece of art of, I think you could provide something like that, and not have to get into Andy Warhol discussions of is, the Campbell soup a piece of art or not.
Well, and so, to be fair, I think the challenge would be, can we craft language that is specific enough to identify, maybe it is, using some of the examples you say, you must provide what's going to be understood to be public art as part of your building. Options, one of the following: statuary of such and so size, a mural of such and so size. If we could come up with a good list that feels like I might actually have a shot at a developer at providing something that works for what I'm trying to achieve with the building, and not like forcing me into, I don't like any of these things. I didn't want to do a statue. I didn't want to do this, that. I'm going to have to go to a type 3 review to meet this public art requirement because I think the whole building is a work of art, but that's not somehow in the type 1. I meet every other standard, but that thing is going to push me, this one requirement is going to basically push me into type 3 review. I think that the challenge and the question is, could we come up with a good enough list of specific things that I could show you I meet one of these, and it's actually meaningful and not just I gave you a little statue because that's what your code said. Give me a statue of this size.
Chair, if I may.
Yes, please, Commissioner Massey.
Sure. First of all, I think what you've presented is really great. I love the fact that we have simplified the downtown design process. But I think what you're hearing from the commissioners, you're also hearing it from me, is that we don't want to miss this opportunity to incorporate a art requirement, shall I say, a standard, whatever, into the downtown review process. And I think that I would feel uncomfortable sending this to the city council without incorporating that. Listening to you, I think you've got all kinds of great ideas about how to develop this.
Yeah, you've been thinking about it.
I just say, great, Brett, take a crack at it, because I'm hearing a lot of good ideas. And I just don't want us to miss this opportunity.
And what, I'm sorry, Chair. What I'm worried about is that even if it's a type 1 review and we have a discretionary process for public art, and somehow you tie that discretionary process into a final occupancy, right, kind of deal, that is it actually illegal to put in a discretionary type of review into a type 1 process?
I think the short answer to that is yes.
Yeah.
I think it becomes not clear and objective when you introduce discretion. So
Even though that it's a public art requirement, and then if everybody knows that it's public art, you know, all you got to do is meet whatever the state or whatever the discretionary is of a review board of the public art. Still doesn't work.
yeah. So I'll let Justin address that, and then I'll just note Elizabeth.
I don't want to dive too deep into it, but the complication is that in a land use review process, the applicant is entitled to a final land use decision. That final land use decision allows him or her to go build what they're going to build pursuant to plans that are obtained through a building permit. Building permits aren't what I would classify as something that's innately discretionary, right? They have to meet certain standards when they build, and they pay their fee, and they get their building permits. But when you hold up that land use decision, that final land use decision, because it is diverted into some other discretionary process, and then try to hold them from their building permits, you've removed the clear and objective criteria standard that they strove to, or they were striving to meet in order to get the land use approval. And now in the discretionary process, it works a little bit differently, because you're not trying to just check all the boxes for all this stuff. But you would be kind of diverting a discretionary process after you got your land use approval, and they wouldn't be able to complete what their land use approval got them until they finished a discretionary process. Does that make sense? And the whole reason for the clear and objective criteria requirement is that they don't have to do that.
Right, so we would have to come up with a list of clear standards.
Well, that's notes I was actually making here is when Commissioner Sherman was saying, oh, a mural of so many feet or a statue. I mean, the list potentially is endless. What if you have a building that doesn't have a space to put a mural, or, you know, I don't know where you end. And then if the list doesn't have an end, or an applicant comes to you and says, I don't like anything on the list, I want to do something else. What do you think about this? Boom, that's discretionary.
Well, but that turns into a type 3.
Right. So, I mean, it's a difficult process. Doesn't mean it can't be done. I don't know that we're missing an opportunity right now, because I think we could necessarily, or at some point, revisit public art kind of in a larger context and incorporate it into what we're doing today. But that's for you all to decide where you want to go with your recommendation.
Can I ask?
And
Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying.
Can I?
Vice Chair Edge.
Oh, sorry. Can I've seen Elizabeth Decker, our consultant, has had her hand up for a little bit, and I didn't know if she wanted to weigh in on this particular point. But I guess if you'll just make sure that she gets an opportunity as well, and with respect to the Vice
Sorry,
Chair.
Elizabeth, I didn't realize you were with us. Elizabeth and
Yes.
Childs.
Good evening, Planning Commission and Chair. Sorry, we have a kitten.
Please state your name and address, said Child.
Elizabeth Decker with Jet Planning, address is 2712 Southeast 20th Avenue. And just to add a little bit of context, I wanted to go back to Commissioner Edge's comment earlier, just to refresh the Commission's perspective that the purpose of this project and the charter that we received was to look at the guidelines and the standards and to match those up. And so with regards to public art, you know, this is a really robust and interesting conversation. And of course, you know, Brett and I have talked about different technical ways we could make this happen, and certainly interested to continue the conversation, but just for context of where we came from and why DLC hasn't talked about this to date and why it was not in the initial proposal, is that there really are no standards right now in the downtown design standards chapter about integrating public art, and it's dealt with to a relatively small degree in the downtown design guidelines as well. It essentially says, if you're having art, you should integrate it in these following ways. And so, you know, just for some context of where we came from, hoping to remind you all of that.
Mom.
And interested to hear the conversation continue and additional ideas that you have of if that's a missed opportunity. But to refresh that the DLC did not have a broader discussion of, is there anything missing that needs to be incorporated?
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Vice Chair Edge?
Thank you, Chair. I guess maybe this question, this series of questions might be targeted at Justin, but maybe Brett as well. So for a type 1 process, clear and objective standards, would it be fair to say that we could require a certain amount of either 2-dimensional space or 3-dimensional space be set aside in a development for the purpose of art?
I'll look to Justin to keep me in bounds. I would say, I think yes. I think if we could identify a clear and objective, quantitative kind of number of something that we're able to define to say, yes, 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional space, set aside for public art, at least the spatial part of it, we could address. The what goes in that space, I guess, starts to feel like it gets a little bit harder to nail down. Yes, I gave you some space. Now, are you going to tell me what I get to or have to put in it? Is there more direction from the city in the code about that?
So like I mentioned, this is a series of questions. The next question is,
I don't know.
Would if you were to decouple the discretionary permitting process with the art mob, for instance, of designing art to go into a space in a place, and integrating that art into that space and that particular building, if you were to decouple that from the type 1 process, by not requiring that to be complete before receiving the certificate of occupancy, would that perhaps avoid the legal problem that we're looking at?
Could you restate the question, please?
Decouple the discretionary art process from the type 1 permitting process, whereby you would get a certificate of occupancy. The occupancy permit is not coupled to the discretionary process.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to think about that. I don't necessarily think I'm 100% comfortable with it, in that you would have received your land use approval, you have set aside space, and I want to put a pin in that, because I don't necessarily agree 100% that that's actually a wise requirement in the clear and objective process, but I'm willing to give that some thought. But you will have somebody who has received a land use approval, constructed their building, and now you're withholding a certificate of occupancy before they go, you're decoupling it from whom?
The art.
Right. So in order to get a certificate of occupancy, where's the process for putting the art or deciding what goes up on that space?
I mean, we would define a separate discretionary process for public art, for selecting public art or whatever, designing public art, choosing an artist, whatever. But that is not coupled to their certificate of occupancy.
It's not.
So coupled. Yes, they could. Yes, we need to avoid coupling the occupancy with the discretionary process.
Well,
and I'm wondering if that's.
I think you would need to.
Skirts our.
I think you would need to identify what that process is in a program for an applicant to go through, which as I sit here, I don't know what you're thinking in that regard, or who would run that process, what department it runs in. Is it an independent committee? I don't, I mean, that would take some mixing up the ingredients and baking the cake a little bit more.
Yeah, and then would it perhaps be advantageous in this same manner, in trying to make sure that we're offering clear and objective standards, to offer a FILO for public art, a fee in lieu of. And so that public art money could go into a pool that would then be used in that general area. I mean, obviously there would be a standard associated with the value, right? Like an SDC or something like that, but it would be clear and objective. And if you didn't want to set aside, if you didn't want to comply with the standards for providing space for art or going through that extra permitting process, you could pay a fee in lieu of. Would that offer additional?
Well, I mean, I guess that also involves the establishment of another program. So where's that fee going? Who's in charge of figuring out where it gets spent? And, like when we have FELOC for, say, frontage improvements, they go into a fund and engineering department has those. They've got standards for how they apply them and where they can apply them and stuff like that. I mean, in concept, I think it's interesting. I don't know that we have the infrastructure to implement something like that currently.
Right.
But I think it's an interesting idea.
And then I think this will be the last question in this series. A lot of jurisdictions have what they call 1% for art, and 1% for art is where 1% of there's a fee attached to or a tax. I'm not sure. Probably a fee attached to development, permits, land use permits. Whereby 1% of the value, the value of the development is is charged as a fee that goes for public art in the city. This is a pretty common approach that's used by a lot of different jurisdictions, and you can even go Google 1% for the arts. It has a tagline. It's a pretty common approach, and so would it? Although that's obviously not a land use thing, would it be within our wheelhouse to perhaps make a recommendation to the city council that in considering a public art program consistent with the updated comprehensive plan policies, that they possibly consider a 1% for the arts fund?
Oh, I don't know why you couldn't recommend something along those lines. I mean, the goal here is to get public art, right? And I don't know that we have the vehicle in front of us right now to get that based on what staff's been tasked with right now and the current programs we have for, interesting idea about a FELOC for art. We would have to establish and figure out how to run that type of program to make that system work. But certainly exploring those as well as the 1% is something you could attach to your recommendation, I think.
Thank you. That's all.
Chair Losfeld,
Yep.
if I may.
Sure. Commissioner Sherman?
Thanks. I think thinking even just the kind of the Vice Chair's Edge's reference to the comp plan brings me back to thinking about our city vision. And I think some of the words that come to mind is delightfully livable, I think is part of our catchphrase. And I think art is definitely kind of an embodiment of that. And I think some of the discussion we've had here and even just some simple Googling, I think we can figure this out. Thinking about whether it's sculptures or mosaics or water elements or mixed media, installations, murals, drawings, paintings, monuments, I think the kinds of arts could be defined and we could figure this out. And I think given Commissioner Hemer's questions about timeline, and Commissioner Massey's comment, I think I too feel like I'd like to spend some more time on this before we maybe move it forward. I recognize other commissioners might want to talk about art some more. I also had some questions about public notice, if we're ready to move on in terms of topics.
I feel we're ready to move on. Let's see. Are there others who want to make comment first? Okay. So that would cover any clarifying questions that we have for staff. So next I'll just go into the testimony piece, which is,
Sorry, I guess I do have clarifying question just on the public notice question, not on art.
okay,
Great, thanks. I was just curious, in the staff report, it talks about, it kind of recounts the conversation we had last time, and the fact that we couldn't really find a consensus on that. And then it says, the latest recommendation is to refrain from introducing a special requirement for type 1 notice into the zoning code, and instead to allow staff to internally develop alternative informational procedures to share with the Planning Commission. And I'm curious, like, what is that, or what does that mean or look like?
Well, I think the universe could include some of the things that that were discussed at the last work session. It could be, an original idea was for a type 1 new building, send a mailing notice to people within 300 feet. Just with information that a project is happening. Could be using a more electronic method. We already have a project webpage, but maybe we're taking more advantage of, I don't know if it'd be appropriate to use the Engage Milwaukie engine. That might not quite be the right way to do it, but the weekly NDA newsletter that gets mailed out electronically, a big sign, posting a large sign on the site with information about the project that's coming. I think we've tried to be pretty clear about the idea that requiring like a pre-submittal meeting with the NDA was a topic that probably needs a little bit larger, more broad discussion about engagement in general in the city. But I think that's a pretty small universe for the moment, but those, I guess, just some of those ideas, exploring those, and maybe some other suggestions that people might have about what would be an effective way to let people know that a new building is happening without codifying it, I guess, to be only one way.
Great, thanks. I appreciate hearing some more. I'll think on that if anybody else has any questions in the meantime.
I will move us on to the testimony aspect. If there are no other clarifying questions for staff. Staff, have we received any correspondence on this matter other than those that were included in the packet?
No.
Audience testimony. Do we have any audience members? First off,
We have no actual or virtual audience members.
even actual. Oh, interesting. Okay, gotcha. So then I'll move past rebuttal and go to the closure of our public hearing. The public testimony portion of this hearing, ZA-2022-003 Code Amendments Downtown Design Review, is now closed. And now the opportunity for our commissioners to discuss. Yes, Vice Chair Edge.
Thank you, Chair. This has been going on for a very long time. The chair was working on this when she was chair of the DLC. And at that same time, I was representing this body in that venue with the DLC, coming up with what you see today. We tried, there's a lot of effort that was put into this. And then frankly, even before I was, doing that, there was a commissioner before me that was, representing the commission, on this project. And so this has been going on for a very, very long time. And I think the time is right for us to conclude this project with its current scope. And I have been, ever since we were working on the comp plan policies in a draft state for public art, I've been trying to figure out how we can get public art into our code in a clear and objective way. I know we can do it. But I don't know that we want to hold up this effort to achieve that, because what we're trying to do here again is make sure that our code for downtown has alignment between clear and objective standards and guidelines. And so what Brett said is, although this is kind of a big lift, this really is kind of, like a cleanup, and it's just, a bulky one. But I appreciate the effort that staff put into this. I appreciate the effort that the DLC put into this. And I appreciate the concerns that the rest of the commission shares with me about public art and about how we address public art downtown, which I think is critically important. But I'm comfortable recommending this for approval in its current state, because I think that what we need is to send the message to City Council about how important public art is, especially downtown, and to encourage them to explore a public art program that we can integrate into our design standards and design guidelines and comply with the law and still get high quality public art. I know we can do this. I just think that it needs to happen as part of its own process, and we need to engage the art mob in that process and find out how they want to, and what is their role in that. This needs to, we need the equity, committee needs to see this and say, here's how we get equitable public art. We shouldn't design these standards on our own. I really think that the city needs to engage in a rich process of deeply engaging the community about how we achieve high quality public art in downtown and throughout the city, quite frankly, not just downtown, all over the city. So I would really like to encourage us to vote to recommend approval of these amended standards and guidelines, and and to make that recommendation to City Council tonight, but with a very strong message about the importance of public art and how important it is that we actually revisit public art in a meaningful way and engage the community about how we achieve that downtown and citywide. Thank you.
Vice Chair Edge, I appreciate the message, and I would second that. There has been so much work and concentrated effort and focus on this, and it's evolved so much, since I left the DLC, and I do really appreciate the time that this group has put into it to make this a very clear process, which I think as we look forward to the future development of downtown and infill, I'm excited about what this clarity means for future development, for the process, for this body. I think this has real positive impact on the future of downtown Milwaukee. Is it perfect? There are probably areas where we could think of revisions and edits and how it could be more perfect, but I think it is an extremely strong step in the right direction. And I would also encourage and ask Vice Chair Edge, think more directly about how you would state that recommendation in a future motion as we continue to talk. How might you phrase that? But I agree with you wholeheartedly. Other commissioners at the dais, maybe?
So what I would like to do is I would like to actually ditto both of your guys' remarks. The work that has gone in from the DLC is immense. The amount of time that this has taken up is applaudable. But the only thing that I disagree with your guys' statement is that, no, we should not recommend this on without putting in the public art. And this is why. And I keep saying it over and over and over again. I know we're going to use the excuse, oh, there's a process, or it's too hard, or whatever we want to use. But this opportunity is never, ever going to come back again. Our plan is already filled out for till all the way up to 2024. So when do you think you're going to see it again? You're not. And I can tell you that it is not rocket science. There has to be another city in the state of Oregon, because all we have to do is worry about Oregon, right? Because they're the only ones that have the comp plan, that can actually, right, come up with something that has clear and objective standards that includes public art. It can't be that hard. And since there is no timeline, there is no requirement to finish this out with time, that I think that we should be bold, and that instead of just giving a recommendation that's going to get tossed aside, never get put anybody's thing until 5 or 10 years later, some idiot planning commissioner, when the thing comes up, starts screaming and yelling about public art, then you know what's going to happen? I can guarantee it, because I've heard it. This is my 5th time, I think. Brett's been around long enough. He knows he's heard it probably about that many times too. Oh, we'll do it next time. Bull crap. And I hope that there's enough guts in this room to actually stand for it. Now, I may be a loner on this, but you know what? Hell have fury. You have not seen the pitches and or the pitchforks and torches come out and how I'm going to raid City Hall. Sorry. I'm probably not allowed to use that term anymore. But we're going to get this passed. And I think that the Planning Commission should be the gutsy group to do it.
Chair?
Commissioner Massey?
Yeah, I understand the desire to move this good work forward. Part of me says, yeah, let's do it. And let's do a circle back and address art on a wider scale. But I share Commissioner Hemer's concern. I just think it's a circle back we won't get to. That's my concern. So I'm in a real dilemma here about what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll follow on that as well, Chair Losfeld. I think that while I might not share Commissioner Hemer's enthusiasm on the topic, I agree. I think the opportunity, if we let the ship out of the harbor, it will sail, and it might not return for a while. And I think recognizing that while this is a long-standing and important, and I think a lot of good work has been done in terms of the cleanup. It's a cleanup project, and nothing's going to fall apart in probably the next 2 months if we spend a little bit more time kind of working on this. And I think while we could send a strong message to council by maybe voting no on this, we could also probably agree as a body to postpone a vote on this, to a future time certain, to continue working on it a little bit more. So those are just some of my thoughts at this point.
Commissioner Ernst, do you have anything that you might want to add? No?
No, not particularly, other than I do understand everybody's passion on this subject. I appreciate the staff's work that goes into all of this. I do understand the complexity of trying to write all of what would be entailed to make this happen. I also come from the frame of reference of living in Palm Springs in the desert for a long time, and everything is cookie cutter there. I mean, it's all beige and HOA approved. And so my frame of reference here is we do have a lot of art in our community. We do have a lot of passion already. We do. And I'm not saying that there can't be more. And I'm not saying that, having requirements, doesn't or does make sense. I'm kind of hearing both sides and in the middle on this. But I definitely come from the experience or frame of reference that I look around and I see art all over our city, and I feel very lucky already that we do have such a passionate community that that expresses art a lot. So is there any downside to postponing, or, I mean, other than, I mean, or from the staff's point of?
Well, I think it's just going to be more complicated, and it's going to take up a lot. It'll take some time. So I can't say when we'll come back with this, because Brett has other things on his work plan, and this wasn't on his work plan. So we just have to look at that holistically as to what kind of impact it would have, because I think it is pretty complicated. It is, regardless of whether you like the word or not, it is complicated, and we have legal requirements. So we would need to really understand it. And it's proposing practically a program, and we don't have kind of, we haven't talked to council about developing a program around this type of work. And so that would be something that we would need to kind of get direction from. So I don't know when we would come back with this after initial exploration onto what it would entail. So that would be something that we would need to work and work with Justin offline to figure out what would be the appropriate next step. So I can't make a guarantee as to when this would come back to the Planning Commission with this whole new component that we have not researched at all.
Vice Chair Edge.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think I appreciate Laura saying that. I really feel like what this deserves to be done well is a program. It deserves a program, a citywide public art program, and that's not something that's really in our wheelhouse to define. And so, again, I feel very strongly that given the amount of work that's gone into this so far, it's with, what's in front of us is within the scope of that work. And I think that we should move this forward. And, I appreciate the concern about whether or not City Council will actually follow through on a public art program. I think we can hold them to it. I think that, as stakeholders in the city, as residents of the city, as, workers in the city, business holders, landowners, I think that we can, all put pressure on City Council about how important it is to have a public art program and get this worked in, a sensible way that engages different, the different committees of the city and the different, residents of the city to provide feedback into this. I mean, I feel like it deserves a deeper look than what this set of amendments is trying to do. And so I feel comfortable decoupling a future public art process from what we're looking at right now, even though I understand that it is uncertain. So I would still encourage us to vote to recommend approval of this package.
I don't know if what we're thinking about needs to rise to the level of a program. I think framing it as a program is maybe overcomplicating it. I think just as we can establish a requirement and developers and their talented team can figure out how to meet that requirement. I don't think this has to be an additional burden on staff time to figure out how to program and all of those things. I think as soon as we start talking about it as a program, we're just killing it. So I would move we postpone a vote on agenda item ZA-2022-003 until our January 24th Planning Commission meeting.
A quick procedural question before anyone seconds that. Do we need to have a vote to postpone or to not hold a vote on the recommendation?
We've opened a hearing, or I'll let.
The continued hearing to a date.
They're asking to continue it to January 24th.
So we would have a motion to continue.
Yeah, it's a motion to continue, not postpone. You have to continue the hearing to a date certain if you would like to continue on this.
Can I just add, would it have to be that long from now? Or,
We'll definitely need that long. Yes.
okay.
Could you rephrase your motion?
Sure, yeah. So I move to continue the hearing on agenda item or file ZA-2022-003 until our January 24th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting.
I'll second.
Have a second? What?
Sorry, we can't hear you, Chair.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I believe Commissioner Massey had seconded it.
Gotcha. All those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
2. All right. That's 3-2 in favor of
4-2.
continuing the hearing.
4-2.
4-2.
4?
Yeah.
Oh,
We got 6
myself.
people up here.
Gotcha. 4-2. Of continuing the hearing to a date certain of, do we decide January 24th?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you all. With that in mind, I am going to move on then to other business. Do commissioners have any other items for discussion? Okay, awesome. Future forecast of meetings.
So it looks like right now we've got 2 meetings left for the rest of the year. So we've got one coming up on November 8th. It's a little bit different than it states on the agenda because we had to move some things around. So we'll have the Barbara Lynn Way conditional use on the 8th. And then we'll also have a work session on the code amendments for the climate-friendly, equitable communities work. And then right now, nothing is scheduled for the November 22nd meeting, but then we meet again on December 13th. We've got 2 hearing items, one for a variance for Alpha Stoneworks, and then again, a hearing on the code amendments that you're gonna have a work session about on the 8th. And then we're also going to talk, the consultant's gonna be here to talk about the housing needs analysis and the housing production strategy work that's been going on.
Great. Okay, with that in mind, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Maybe just quick.
I move we adjourn. Oh, go ahead.
Are you?
Sorry. So we have November 8th. I'm just thinking about Thanksgiving week. Are we planning on the
Yeah, that one
22nd?
we currently do not have
Okay.
anything on the schedule, so I'm trying, I've been.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Laura
right.
wants to go to Carolina for.
I'm not going anywhere. I'll be hunkered down right here, but I don't want to, we don't want to be anyway, yes, trying to keep it open.
Thanks for the clarification. Vice Chair Edge, you were saying something?
I think it was
I
a
move we adjourn.
motion. Thank you. Do I have a second? No, come on.
Okay, I'll take it.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Good night, everybody.
Thank you all.
Nay.